Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. And today we start with a song from the marvellous new musical The House of Edgar.
In the greenest of our valleys, by fair spirits tenanted, once a fair and stately palace, radiant palace reared its head. In the monarch thought's dominion, it stood there, no mortal's high opinion, about a fabric half so fair.
Glorious golden, and its roof did float and flow, and its roof did float and flow. All this was in the olden time, long ago.
In every gentle air that dallied, in that sweet day, the rampart bloomed and pallid,
a window door went away.
And run about his home the glory
that lost and built
is but a dim remembered story.
It's but a dim remembered story of the olden time entombed. And travellers now within that valley through redlands and windless sea, past walls that move fantastically to the most discordant melodies, like a ghastly rapid river through the pale dawn. Pages from the shop forever, they laugh, but smile no more. They laugh but smile, they laugh but smile, no more. They laugh but smile, they laugh but smile, no more. They laugh but smile, they laugh but smile,
no more. Hello and welcome to Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, although for today's purposes I'm not really here. Because my role today is merely to open the episode and then hand over to an old friend of this programme, noted composer and lyricist Michael Gordon Shapiro, who, as you may remember from other conversations here on Musical Talk, was so taken with a new musical at this year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe, The House of Edgar, that he arranged to speak to the composers whilst he was visiting Edinburgh. And so in a minute we'll hear Michael talking to Jack Dryden, the producer, Beth Conley, the director, and Thomas F. Arnold, the writer and musical director of The House of Edgar. It was one of those shows at the Fringe that people were talking about in a really positive way. And to take us into that interview, let's hear another song from that very excellent score. This song, although I didn't get to see the show at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, has lodged itself in my mind so completely and so delightfully, I can now say it's one of my favourite songs. It's called The Telltale Heart.
I am dreadfully nervous, but I am not mad. Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story.
when I first had the faintest of foulest of thoughts, unfeasible to say, but once lodged in the back of my restless brain, it would haunt me night and day. The old man never harmed no man, but it was by his hand that I thrived. Yet I took delight in the right to ensure that by night he would no longer survive.
He had never wronged me, he had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold.
Now this is the point, you fancy me mad. You would not judge if you saw how I planned. Madmen know nothing, they know not a jot. Nervous I may be, but a madman I'm not. Yes, manic I may be, but a madman I'm not. So for 7 nights by lantern light I hid outside his door, and the time was spent to sharpen senses, sense but fearless, nervous of the nearness of the task that I perform. Lantern aloft, I slowly pushed the lonely door aside. With disbelief, I saw him wake from his sleep, his eyelids peeled back wide. Now this is the point, you fancy me mad. You would not judge if you saw how I planned. Madmen know nothing, they know not a jot. Nervous I may be, but a madman I'm not. Yes, manic I may be, but a madman I'm not. Subduing my pride, I knelt down by the side and gazed upon the source of my rage, of my pain, of my fear and disdain, of an evil cold and coarse. From his mouth came too late to unseal his fate a single final cry, as with his last living look he fixed me with that pale blue vulture's eye. His pulse rang like a drum beat of thudding bass and marching snare, and it faded into the distance as I entered the vulture's glare. The night waned, and I worked hastily but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then tore up 3 planks from the flooring and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye,
not even his, could have detected anything wrong. As the bell sounded the hour, I heard a knocking at the door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I to fear? There entered 3 men, officers of the police, who said they had heard a shriek. I told them the old man was away in the country, and bade they search his house well.
Now this is the point, you fancy me mad. You would not judge if you saw how I... Like a pocket watch it pottered, the softest ticking caught my ear, and it rose like a double-time bass drum beat, marching ever near. And like a disease of pained unease took root deep in my gut. It seeped and spread and oozed and wept like a foul and festering cut. As it rose running red like cloyed clotting blood lumping back at the back of my throat, it mixed with the deafening dead man's pulse to produce a pounding note. The chaotic chord crescendo, it was the devil's art. I fell to my knees before the police, overwhelmed by his telltale heart.
Hey there, Musical Talk listeners. This is Mike Shapiro. While at the Edinburgh Fringe this year, I saw a show called The House of Edgar, which blew me away. I immediately started harassing Thos about it until he broke down and gave me permission to interview the show's creators. Armed with my temporary Musical Talk press badge, I sat down with Thomas F. Arnold, the show's writer, Beth Cowley, who was both director and a cast member, and producer Jack Dryden, who, despite his job description, was actually a decent guy. Here's how that conversation went.
Musical Talk.
I'm here with several creatives from the Argosy Theatre Company, here to talk about their Edinburgh Fringe production, The House of Edgar. I thought I'd start by asking you each to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your role in the production in the company, and understand that later on I'll give you the opportunity to give me your whole life story if you so choose. So Beth, why don't you start us off?
Hi, I'm Beth. I am the director for House of Edgar, and I also play Annabelle Lee in the cast.
I'm Jack. I'm one of 2 producers, Kelly, who is currently out on the Royal Mile flyering, as we all do. So I'm in charge of helping out with the budgets, the risk assessments, and all the logistics of how we run while we're up here in Edinburgh, and all the publicity as well.
And I'm Tom. I'm the musical director and the writer of The House of Edgar, and also play piano in the show.
And by writer, you're a writer, book writer, lyricist, and composer.
Yeah, it's a handful. I had help, but Beth was very helpful, just sort of pointing me in the right direction. But yeah.
And you're very modest right off the bat. So I thought I'd ask if one or all of you could tell me a little bit about the company itself, where you're from geographically, what the origins are, and let's start with that.
So we are from Exeter University. I was a drama student up until July, so I've just graduated, and I met Tom when he came to university in my second year, and we worked on a project together that I was directing, that he came in as musical director and as the piano player for, and we kind of went from there, and then have done 4 or 5 musicals together since then, and then about 16, 17 months ago, Tom approached me about writing a project together and kind of forming a company potentially with the view of going to Edinburgh with it. and gave me a book of Edgar Allan Poe stories over Easter and sent me home with homework, effectively. And that's kind of where the company sparked from, really.
Had you any familiarity with the work of Poe before this show?
Not really. I mean, I knew the Telltale Heart, and I knew the Raven, I knew the big ones, but I'd never read any of the short stories or anything really other than Telltale. So things like House of Usher, which has a big influence on the show, and things like knowing about Poe's relationship with his wife and things like that, I had no idea about. So I found out an awful lot very rapidly working on the project, which was really nice.
Mention. And Jack, how did you get involved?
So I first heard about the idea in January of this year. Obviously it's now August, so it's not been very long that I've been involved compared to how long these two have been working on it. But yeah, I was told in January we'd like to take a show to the Edinburgh Fringe. This is the show idea. I didn't actually see the show until May, despite working on it all that time. I'm a law student, so I'm always very busy at university, and I had other shows that I was doing as well. But yeah, from there, from the first stage, we started thinking about funding. The show was graciously funded. We got about £3,000 through crowdfunding. So we set up a crowdfunding campaign on our website. Friends and family were much of that, but a lot of it was the public as well. We were featured on the front page of the crowdfunder website for several days, which we were really glad about. And I think as a result of that, we went from what was a £2,000 goal to £3,000 and being able to be fairly comfortable now that we're in Edinburgh.
Was the presence of a live ensemble part of the fundraising effort? Had you planned for maybe just piano, and then when the money rolled in, you were able to expand to the ensemble that you had?
I think the show had always been sort of on this scale. At one point early on, it was probably bigger, and we've had to downsize it more than anything. Certainly from a band perspective, there was points where we were wondering about bringing a drummer up and that kind of thing, which obviously logistically is a bit of a nightmare to do in Edinburgh. We're now sort of settled in with a trio of piano, guitar and fiddle, but I think that's really added to the sound of the show as well, and I wouldn't want to orchestrate it any other way really now. I really like the way it's settled, but certainly early writing and early songs had larger ensembles. That has all been scaled back, so everybody in the show is now a named character to an extent, and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Very cool. So artistically, I've described this as both a tribute to Poe, but also an original artwork in the spirit of Poe at the same time. And I've been cautious when describing it to not reveal any of the show's secrets, because there are a number of Poe-like twists, and obviously I don't want to spoil anything for the audience. So, Tom, could you give a top-down synopsis for the benefit of the listeners who haven't seen the show, and where you spoil as much as you feel comfortable doing?
Okay, because we always have fun with this, because the show sounds incredibly boring when you take all the spoilers out, because it's about Rufus Griswold, who was a real-life poet who lived around the same time as Poe, and who early on had been very close friends. Our show takes place after Poe's death, and Rufus Griswold has inherited Poe's estate. During their relationship, they fell out over something, and that's left very much in the dark about what sort of broke down that relationship. And it becomes increasingly obvious that Griswold doesn't have the best intentions towards Poe's estate. So we end up with a kind of mix of Griswold reading Poe's stories, and you're getting almost like a musical review of different short stories and poems, and then this through line of Griswold in Poe's house and his slightly malicious intent towards the work.
And then things happen.
Then a lot of, things happen.
Describe. Can you tell us what motivates the Griswold sharing of Poe's works in the story? We created a new character called that we call Mr. Price. That's kind of an in-joke for us, that we've named him after Vincent Price, the actor, who appeared in a lot of adaptations of Poe's work on film. But Mr. Price is a lawyer who's very much a fan of Poe's work, and Griswold is trying to sort of show off the work and say, this is terrible, it's just horrible and so dark-hearted. And he's trying to prove that point, and then a lot of what the thrust of the show then becomes is about sort of almost why do we enjoy horror stories, and what is the appeal, and why do we celebrate them? Because certainly you look at something like The Telltale Heart, and I really enjoy it,
But at the same time, I then have to question myself, why do I enjoy a story that's so dark? And so I think a lot of it becomes that. And it's almost Griswold, in some ways, learning to appreciate it, or at least come to terms with the fact that there is an audience for that sort of writing, even if it isn't for him. But yeah.
It's him finding an emotional connection through some of the poetry and some of the stories as well. I think that kind of fuels quite a lot of the plot towards the latter stages of the show. I think that becomes part of it as well. You sort of see a kind of transition in his character from being very dismissive and very cold about the work to then kind of almost warming to it despite himself, and that's kind of then when the audience starts to see a softer element of his character.
There's also the element, of course, that Griswold in some ways is in these stories. Poe wrote very autobiographically, even if usually metaphorically. So there are villains in the work and that kind of thing that a lot of academics would say are based on Rufus Griswold and the feud they had, and there's a lot of stuff about their complicated history together. So there's always that very personal investment for Rufus as a character going through the show.
That's very interesting, and it anticipates a question I meant to ask, which was Griswold, who's obviously a Salieri-like figure here, how fictional was he or how real was he? And I get the impression that he was 100% real.
Yeah, there's famously he wrote an obituary for Poe where he, in one of the main newspapers, which said, Edgar Allan Poe is dead. Many will be shocked by the news, but few will be grieved by it. Which I think just summarised his feelings towards Poe so perfectly, and just his savagery. And yeah, I really like actually that parallel to Salieri and Amadeus. I think is a very close one. But it's interesting sort of looking back at their lives together, jobs that they fought over, women they fought over, and that kind of thing.
Now, the show strikes me as being something of a love letter to Poe. It's, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a hagiography, but there's a lot of obvious affection and admiration for the author. And it seems that this, even though Poe is well known, the episode of his contentious relationship is not well known. So how did you come across this subject matter, and what inspired the particular story?
So I'd read, there's a wonderful, very small collection of his some of his short stories called Stories for Halloween, which I read on Halloween. I was on a train, it was midnight, and it was really atmospheric. Carriage was empty, lights were flickering, all that kind of thing. And at that point, I really like Gothic literature and those sort of horror stories, and thought about doing a song cycle with the stories where it would just be the sort of musical review approach. And then I was reading up about Poe. Most of this came from Wikipedia, really, but then there was reading of biographies and later stuff. But that was when I began to find out about Rufus Griswold and his influence. And I really liked the idea of trying to understand Poe's work and what motivated him, but examining him from an outside eye. There have been a couple of musicals already based on Poe, and both of them have been about his life and featured him at the centre. And I think it's really interesting. Again, Amadeus is another good touch point in that to really understand someone, looking at the effect they had on the people around them more than their own life themselves.
One element I really liked, and I'll trust this is not too spoilery, is that there's this bet between Griswold and the executor, who are having a little bit of an argument as to Poe's literary merits. And Griswold says, here's $20 if you can find a passage for me that constitutes real literature, or something to that effect. So there's a bit of a combative outer story that is the entry point for looking at all of these individual works of Poe. And I think this makes it very compelling for the audience, because it's not just a song cycle, as you implied.
Yeah.
There's character motivations that are hooked into the song cycle. There's something at stake. So we have a real emotional investment in the outcome of these pieces.
Yeah, there's certainly with that one, because we then go into Telltale Heart, which is possibly one of the darkest and most foul of Poe stories. I'd like to think, so the way we do it, we have Ben Phillip playing the narrator, the madman, in that story, and he's got such a bizarre connection with the audience that he makes every night, and the audience really seems to take to him. Certainly reviews we've got as well, he's always given a shout out. So it's despite it being so foul and you kind of seeing where that's going, there's still definitely, I think, the audience are very much on Poe's side in a way, despite his absence. Certainly through that story.
Yeah, I think they get on board with the stories in a kind of, I think it was really important for us to find a way of them connecting emotionally. So whilst the kind of, obviously the relationship with Poe and Griswold did exist in real life, our kind of spin on it probably is motivated by a kind of like a connection being formed with the audience as well, I think, which aids the stories then connecting with them too, which I think is helpful.
Beth, talk to me a little bit about your approach for directing the piece and perhaps what it's like, given that you have a collaborative history, to be doing something of this scope.
I mean, the cast have been, like, they're an amazingly talented bunch, and like they're really responsive as a group. You kind of, I think you sometimes, not very regularly, but you do come up against kind of like actors who are maybe a bit resistant and things as a director, and I think they've been so responsive and so willing to work with me as, like, I'm a young director, like I've done some work, but this is probably my like biggest project that I've taken on solo. So they've been really, really like good about kind of trying out ideas and being really kind of flexible when we throw new material at them. So the whole process, I think, has been quite fluid in that sense, that they've been very willing to take on board anything that me and Tom have approached them with, and have been like very open about trying things out. And equally, I think we've given them that opportunity to really make the show their own. So like some of the lines of dialogue were kind of rewritten to suit the way the actors delivered things, or to like work with their like general rapport and things like that, which I think has been a really nice part of working on an original show, as opposed to something that's been done before and that's kind of like has a history behind it. It's been really nice to kind of work on something completely fresh. That being said, that's also quite scary, because when you have another musical or another play, like you have footage of it, or you have a known way of delivery, or you have a known way of staging. So it's definitely like pulled up all of my like creative ideas, I think, to try and get it off the page and then onto the stage has been like quite challenging creatively, but it's been a really, really good experience from that point of view, definitely. Was
this the premiere of the show?
We did 2 previews back in Exeter in May, when the show was very different, actually, like at quite a different stage of development. Like the core was still the same, the plot was nearly the same, and it was just kind of like elements of the staging and elements of how involved the ensemble are and how involved the ghosts are in the plot had changed quite a lot. So this, taking it up to Edinburgh when we did our previews here, that was the first time that we premiered it with a kind of like a full, with the show fully developed, I think.
She meant metaphorical ghosts, by the way, just so you know.
Spoilers, sorry.
Were there any choices that you made during the course of rehearsals for this production, or that cast members made, that you hadn't anticipated, but were the result of the developmental process?
Yeah, actually that's a really good one. Tom just mimed a click at me, and it's kind of difficult to explain without spoiling it, but there's a kind of quite a twist at the end of the show, which I think took on a very different turn, a really late stage. I think in probably like our second to last rehearsal, we came up to Edinburgh, we were just kind of looking at how we deal with the very, very like last moments of the show, and all of a sudden that became quite different, as did the ending music for the show. I think we had about 4 different endings on the piano for the show, which we kind of experimented with, which all gave it a slightly different feel. So I think how the show lands with the audience now, kind of, it's left on a reasonably sinister note by the music. Like, it's not a very settled feeling ending, and it definitely wasn't like that at one stage. We had a nice big cadence right at the end of the show at one point, which was left it feeling much more resolved, I think. So there have been things like that, definitely. Actors have done completely like different things. I mean, Ben is a great example, who plays the madman, of somebody that you kind of give him a text and he will run off at 100 miles an hour, like kind of with complete full energy, and do something completely wacky with it that you as a director could never hope to catch up with, and you just kind of have to then it's about kind of tweaking what he comes out with. So we have a lot of actors that work like that their impulses are really, really strong, and kind of like their instincts as actors are really, really good. So then it's just more about planting suggestions with them and then kind of like refining bits, rather than kind of having to really coach like exact delivery of lines and things. So I think it's always come out, the dialogue has always come out differently when people have got it up on their feet than I think we imagined when like working on the writing of it.
A lot of sections became surprisingly much funnier, I
Yeah.
think, than they were originally meant on the page, which certainly isn't a problem. And the way the audience have engaged in those sort of more humorous sequences, particularly between sort of the dialogue-heavy scenes that occur sort of throughout, which I hadn't anticipated but really enjoy.
That's very interesting. And I had a great question, and I've totally forgotten it. So I'm going to fall back on some reliable staples. Can you, Tom, talk to me a little bit about the score, which I thought of as kind of folk gothic, or I may have stolen that description from your promotional material, but for whatever reason, those words really resonate with me. What was the musical inspiration or the decision, what was the point of decision for how to approach the score for the show?
The music changed a lot throughout. There's an element of this show that isn't, as well as being, as you said, a love letter to Poe, there's also, just generally, I'm a big horror cinema fan. I love John Carpenter and that kind of thing. And there was a point where we were looking at the music from a very 80s synthesized point of view, which would have been totally different. And things like Tubular Bells and the theme tune from Halloween and that sort of vibe, and it would have been drums, 2 keyboards and bass or something like that. There was a point where, obviously that would have been totally anachronistic with the plot, and I don't think Beth was ever very comfortable with that instrumentation approach. So we looked at the folk influence, because Poe's stories are deeply rooted in old folk stories and in old ghost stories. And sort of bringing that to it. Again, there's an anachronistic element because the folk sort of influence is quite British and quite English, despite obviously it being a very American story. I tried to include more sort of American folk and blues elements in The Raven, but there's also, I feel, the element of Poe certainly had Irish heritage. And there was quite a major sort of immigration from Ireland at the time. And so there's an element of that style of folk that I feel is coming over with it.
Well, I thought, not to embarrass you too much, but it was a very beautiful and evocative score that was just disturbing enough, but also very accessible.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Don't worry, I won't embarrass you further, at least not on the air. And I thought that was a huge asset, as well as the performance. Jack, at what stage of the developmental history did you jump on board?
So I probably jumped on board just about when we were wrapping up kind of the first draft of the script, I'd imagine, in January. So they're probably Beth and Tom just finished writing the show, and we're just starting to think about, right, we're going to start auditioning this, start trying to get people involved in the cast. So my first job was let's get some tracks out there so that people can hear what we're offering them, and set up some auditions. So we did that. We had a really good crop of people come through the auditions process, and we firmed that down. And then the next stage was just to start talking about funding and how are we going to get this show that we know deserves a good audience to Edinburgh and make sure that it survives and thrives up here. So it's a case of making a very stingy budget. The set design that Beth originally showed me had lots of very expensive bookcases and books and stuff. That's now been reduced first to flats, then to crates on the stage, then to crates with fake books inside because we couldn't afford or lift books in the crates. And then, so there are lots of stages, particularly from me going, right, well, we just can't afford that, I'm sorry, we're doing this. We were originally looking at a venue that had around about 120 seats. We're now at a venue that's 60 seats, and I think it suits the show a lot better, being where we are. It feels very intimate, very tight. And that's what you want to feel when you're going to see something like a ghost story or a horror story. You want that really tight environment. So a long process of these kind of decisions of, right, well, we have this big show, as Tom was saying earlier, that they wrote a show for a big stage, and we had to convert it into a show that suited Edinburgh. And that meant a lot of tongue wagging from me going, no, we can't do that, sorry. But I've enjoyed every step of it, yeah.
A thankless job of a producer. And I notice you have a late time slot in the evening. Was that something you aimed for, or was it just a lucky coincidence?
I think our target time probably would have been a little bit earlier. But because the show was coming together quite late in the timescale for the Fringe, so when we actually started looking at venues, it was probably around kind of April time. So that there's only certain slots that are available, there's only certain venues that are available. So we listened to the offers, and it was the best offer that we had. We think it's a fantastic slot for the show, really. It still fits, it still works really well. But we probably would have aimed to be a little bit earlier in the evening if we'd had more opportunities open to us.
Well, speaking as an audience member, there is something psychologically impactful about showing up at 10 o'clock, I think, or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Because it's getting late and maybe your defenses are down and you're a little more vulnerable to psychological manipulation. Even if you're not staring at a window, you still have an internal sense of time. And seeing the show at that time, I thought was a really neat effect.
I mean, I think our biggest criteria was we wanted to start the show when it was dark outside. And if we achieved that, we would probably have been happy. And because we thought you can't walk in from sunshine and go in and listen to stories about Poe, that would just be quite jarring for an audience. So we wanted, if it was dark outside, we probably would have been happy with the slot times. But yeah, I think the 10 o'clock does work really well for our show. It's just unfortunate it does mean that some people who have seen lots of shows that day don't want to stay on quite as late. So it probably has affected ticket sales a little bit, but you win some, you lose some.
One thing that struck me about the production, apart from the artistic virtues, was the very tight and polished performance. The vocal harmonies were all spot on, the timing of the musicianship seemed impeccable. How much rehearsal time did you have, and how much experience did the ensemble, both the musical ensemble and the acting team, have previously together?
A lot of the cast had worked together before. So there are two big musical theatre societies in Exeter, and almost all of the cast had been a part of one or both of those societies. We did, earlier on this year, there was a big production of Phantom of the Opera in the university, so a lot of us were involved with that. So a lot of the people had experience singing and acting and dancing, obviously. The majority of the cast don't read music, so learning the harmonies was a lot of just kind of hard graft with it, really, and just with me and Tom listening out as best we could to try and teach people orally, basically, with the harmonies primarily, I think. I think the majority of the cast are they're so musical as a group, like they picked things up really, really quickly, to be fair. Particularly, I mean, there's a section in one of the songs, Best Than Now, which Alice, who plays Geppetta, sings, and Tom was a delight with that and wrote a section that's in 14/8. So poor Alice was like trying to learn this song, counting 14/8, which is like virtually impossible to count as a singer, that you normally get 3/4 and 4/4, and that's what you sing in. So the music is really challenging from like a rhythm end of it. So I think it was definitely a challenge, and we spent a lot of time really drilling harmonies and drilling timings and getting everything very, very slick in that respect, that's kind of how we worked on the cast end of it.
The band end was sort of, we did 2 or 3 rehearsals together just on the score, just sort of by ourselves. Kate and Maddie, who play fiddle and guitar in it, we were already good mates. I don't think Kate and Maddie knew each other that well, but I was certainly really good friends with both them. We'd played ensembles together, again we'd done Phantom earlier on, and which I'd been the musical director for, and Kate had been our first violinist for that. So we gelled quite quickly. And then it was a case of, it was a bit of an unusual rehearsal process where we just went to as many cast rehearsals as we could, even if it was just cast drilling one song for 2 hours, so we could just play it over and over again. So we've now got them so they really groove and just sit very firmly on the beat. So we're off book for the whole show. We don't have sheet music, which I think really adds to the folk feel of it. And that came through just playing the songs over and over again in as many cast rehearsals as all 3 of us could go to together.
Yeah, I think that's been really unusual in our processes, that the band and cast have been really, really heavily involved alongside each other, which is not so common, I think, in musical theatre. There does tend to be a little bit of a divide in that, as an actor or actually as a director as well, you go in and you tend to have a rehearsal pianist who accompanies your rehearsals, and then you always get this one horrible rehearsal as a singer where you go in and you try and sing with the orchestra, and all of a sudden everything is completely different and everybody has an absolute meltdown, everyone cries, and it's just horrible. And we never had that with this, because the band were there from so early on in the process. So it meant that if there were any problems musically, they were ironed out straight away, and I think it left the cast feeling so secure in the music that it's given them like real license to really relax and play with the music and really make it their own as well as singers, which is really helpful. So I think that's been quite unusual in our process actually, and that's kind of credit to like your involvement with like directly with the show.
And it's been really helpful as well, just with Kate and Maddie from an arranging point of view. I'm not a guitarist, I'm not a violinist, and so understanding what is possible to play for them to a certain extent. There's a lot of double stopping on the violin and some quite mad guitar stuff that I think was probably impossible when I first wrote it. So it's been really helpful, and I've learned a lot just about arranging and sort of just general musicianship from them and doing that.
It's interesting that you mentioned that there's no sheet music or music stands, which now that I revisit my memory of the show, I think, oh yeah, that's true. They were just playing it, and psychologically, I think you're right. It does create a greater sense of, makes the music more organic, as if the musicians were playing in the same way that the singers are singing material from the heart rather than prepared material. Yeah. It makes you feel the same way about the score, which is a very nice effect.
A music stand is always going to be a natural barrier. We have the band on stage, and as soon as you kind of put that up, it looks, you end up with the aesthetic almost of the musicians are here working. You take the music stands away and I do think they're performing just as much as the actors on stage, and it just helps to enhance the whole feel of it.
They become part of the world of the show rather than something to accompany the show.
And we put them in costume as well, which is probably worth mentioning. We've got them all in their folk dress up there as well, so they're as heavily costumed as the whole of the cast are.
I really enjoyed that.
I noticed in the Fringe, in general this year at least, there's been a number of shows where the lines between orchestra and cast have blurred, and orchestra members have doubled as cast members and vice versa. So is this something you've observed as a general trend, or is this some solution you just came up with for your own purposes?
I think it was more, it worked for us quite well, and it works for the tone of the show because it's so folk-based. I must admit, I haven't been able to see as much of the musical theatre at the Fringe this year as I wanted to, just because of flying schedules and that kind of thing. But I'm certainly hoping to get to things like Stop the Train and Shot Heard Around the World soon. There's quite a few others on my list. But I saw the Candor and Ebb musical review that I've forgotten the title of, that was down here from an American high school. And they did a lot of interaction with the pianist and a lot of jokes that way, which I thought worked really well. I think the trend's really good. I really like the actor-musician dynamic, and it was something we looked at early on, of maybe having actors also performing in the band. Just from the pool that we were auditioning from, it was quite difficult to find that, so we didn't go ahead with it. But.
Yeah, I mean, the score is very complicated. You'd be looking at a very high level of musician who also happened to be able to sing at quite a high level and act and dance. So I think we would have been asking quite a lot from a cast to do that. I've seen productions, not so much this year actually, but I saw things last year where I saw a dance piece where there was a violinist who sort of was on a the mics that clip onto the end. I'm really bad with the technical stuff, but he walked with the violin and interacted with the dancers. They did the kind of work around him, and I think I've seen pieces like that which really integrate it in terms of the movement and things as well, which I think is really exciting. Which obviously presents a lot of technical complications, and they were in a much higher tech. Like I think they were in the Pleasance Ground, so the tech capabilities in there are incredible. But I've definitely seen really exciting work where they start doing things like that, which I think is definitely something as a company that we're quite keen on, that kind of blurring between, it's the whole kind of premise of the company, that blurring between music and theatre and how you integrate them and how you stop it just being your piano player sat there accompanying your singer sort of thing.
When I was talking about the show with Thos earlier today when we were recording our Pan Fringe episode, Thos said he hadn't seen the show yet, but every time he passed a poster, there were more stars on it, which implies you've gotten a very positive reception since the Fringe production started. Would you like to comment a little bit about critical response?
Yeah. So before we came to Edinburgh, Kelly and I probably spent about 2 months sending out somewhere in the region of 3,000 press emails. And right up until 2 days before we opened, we thought they'd gone nowhere. We literally thought they'd all gone down a black hole. And this was until I walked into the Fringe media office 2 days before we opened and said, have we got anyone coming? And suddenly we're given this shopping list of various critics who were supposedly coming to see the show. And gobsmacked would be an understatement. So yeah, we've had, to this date so far, The Stage, Ed Fringe Review, The Times, and The Scotsman. No, not The Times. The Scotsman and...
that was ambitious. You didn't tell us about that one.
The Scotsman and Broadway Baby. And most of those reviews have been in the kind of 4-star region. We had one lovely 5-star review from Ed Fringe Review, who are a student reviews body. They send 2 reviewers in, 2 people who are unaccredited, and they write opposing reviews. So it's quite a clever concept. It was lovely to see the 5-star review come out of that. But yeah, I think we're comfortably saying we're sitting on about a solid 4 stars, which is just great because we didn't know what the response was going to be. We came into the Fringe purposefully not doing a premiere because we wanted to be in the running for something like the Fringe First Award from the Scotsman. You're only allowed a limited number of previews, no press reports whatsoever on those previews. So we had to leave it until Edinburgh to get that response, and I think we were all shocked, first of all, for the critics to be coming, and then shocked again by the response that we received.
It's safe to say we were pretty terrified of the Scotsman in particular, and we were daunted by that one and overwhelmed by their review. They were incredibly kind, and it was like that felt like a real sort of seal of approval. There's always going to be, I think, with performance and that kind of thing, and putting yourself out there where you're so exposed. Like I even now I still don't feel entirely comfortable with the work, but that's probably just natural. I'm always going to be hypercritical of it and that kind of thing. But certainly that was a seal of approval that has been a real blessing.
But I think the response generally has, I think overwhelming is the right word. The critical response has been better than I ever thought we could achieve, which has been amazing. But the kind of feedback that we've had from audience members has been, if anything, more sort of heartfelt and lovely to hear, because people have approached us after pretty much every show, raving at Tom about the music or speaking to us about how good the cast were, and it's just, I think it's a lovely feeling as a startup company with really young, really talented performers who are working with us to have their talent and their kind of hard work for the project recognised by just people coming up to them with enormous smiles after the show. Is that's been incredible. That response has been so amazing.
So given such a warm reception, what are the next steps for the piece? What ambitions do you have, both in the short term, and what's your long-term greatest fantasy about where this could go?
It's a tricky one with this show, because there's definitely an appeal to expanding it, doing 2 acts. There's quite a major event in the middle of the show that I won't spoil, that feels like a natural break point to put an interval. Having said that, though, the more you start to build it up, I don't know. It would certainly be a very different dynamic, but I think the worries there of losing the claustrophobia of it that we currently have. 1 tight hour, 60 seats, and really quite immersed. There's a lot of action that happens off the stage and in the auditorium and that kind of thing. So I think we would still look at expanding it and doing something further with it. Yeah. But always as well keeping this version of it that is the original version, the Fringe version.
We want to keep, I hope so. We want to keep working together as a team, I think, long term. Tom has another year at university, I'm doing a master's this year, so we kind of have a sort of slightly weird interim couple of years ahead of us, I think, where it's going to be a case of us qualifying ourselves to the industry, apart from anything else. And making sure that we have the appropriate training behind us before we're trying to jump in at the deep end. But I think long term it's kind of, we're very keen on keeping, it's about kind of opening up opportunities for young performers and for people who want to write music or who want to direct or who want to do all of those things. It's about giving a platform for new writing and new work that stresses music and theatre as a dynamic and as a duo. Which I think is kind of where we're going with the company long term. So we will see how it's received and then see how we do financially as well. And that will kind of show us our options for the next couple of years, I think.
Yeah, I think we're planning on having a sit-down chat at some point in the next couple of weeks and drawing up some sort of plan. But there will be more. We certainly hope, based on the response that we've had. But yeah.
Are there any concrete ideas for future projects you're toying with that you can share?
I'm going to hand that one over to you.
There's another show. Well, I've got a couple of shows I want to write that are weird ideas and trying to do something slightly different with musical theatre. And yeah, there's a tendency with modern musical theatre, particularly. I think that it's the feel-good, uplifting story, and a lot of the music is very sort of noughties pop, which can be done very well, and that's certainly not meant as a flat-out criticism. I really like the idea of experimenting and trying to find something different there, because musical theatre is very much just a format for telling a story, and not so much, I think, a genre of story. I've got an idea for doing something with 1984. Rights could be tricky. It may happen, it may not. And then I've got an original idea that involves Marilyn Monroe time travelling. And I don't want to say any more in case it never happens. But yeah.
Well, that's obviously an old cliche. So
yes, absolutely.
A number of shows. And Jack, you mentioned you're a law student. Are you specifically targeting entertainment law or theatre-related practice?
Throughout my academic career, I've always been very generalist, and law's a great degree for being generalist. It's very interesting. I love studying it from a kind of political perspective, and how laws are made. Wanting to be a lawyer, definitely not. I'm big on musical theatre, and I love getting involved with these guys and producing, but my other passion is politics. As these guys would probably tell you, I rattle on about it all the time. So it will be one of those two things that I end up doing in some capacity. I'm not sure what yet.
Could you negotiate the rights for 1984 for me, please?
But I enjoy doing the kind of logistical aspect, the management side of it, and the legal complications of rights are always interesting to go through. I haven't actually done intellectual property law, and a law degree doesn't actually qualify you as a lawyer in the UK. You then have to go on to law school, which I'm not going to do, I don't think. But yeah.
You'll have a useful body of knowledge.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you'd like to continue to produce theatre, I think.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed doing it certainly as a hobby. Whether it's a career is a different question, because I think often when you go into theatre production, you need to go out on your own to start off with. It's very difficult to find a job as a producer working underneath someone else. It's usually someone who's gone in there with money, taken a risk, and got somewhere. And to do that at this stage is a bit of a jump off a cliff and hope. But it's certainly something that I'd like to keep doing, because I just love working on it. And then maybe in future, when I've had a successful career and got more money in the bank, it's something that I'd look at doing.
Excellent. Well, the three of you have been very generous in answering every question I could come up with. At the very end, I'll prompt you for all the social media information. So between where we are now and then, I thought I'd open the floor and see if there's anything else you wanted to mention about the show, or its development, or anything that's on your mind on the subject.
I think one thing that we should stress is the support we received from the University of Exeter in developing the show, particularly the drama department. So the show was first premiered in the Term 3 Drama Festival. It's a thing that all the drama students do. It really angers all the other students because we're all doing exams while they're doing it. They're having lots of fun doing shows. Also lots of hard work, of course. But throughout the process, since that first preview in Exeter and all the way up to coming to Edinburgh, we've had support from various people within the drama department, particularly, I'm not going to know names,
Rose, and Alice Chalk have been massively helpful, and a lady called Michelle, who's been very, very generous in lending us all of our costumes, or the majority of our costumes, which includes a lot of vintage tailcoats and things which we definitely wouldn't have been able to source otherwise. So we're very, very indebted to the drama department for all of their help and their support with us as a company. And for all of their knowledge as well, and like suggesting fake books for carrying up and down the mile and things like that, which has been infinitely helpful. So yeah, we were very, very lucky to come from a department that are so supportive of their students and are so invested in making sure that their students have a platform to launch companies like this from. So we've been massively, massively lucky. in that respect because
Perhaps fortunate rather than lucky, because it doesn't sound like it was entirely random.
No, it's not luck. It's their hard work and it's their like passion as a department. I think really that ensures that, and that ensures that their students come out with the same kind of drive for working in the industry as well, I think.
And as someone from outside that department, it's simply amazed me the amount of support we've received. First of all, from the financial front with the costumes, but also Martin, one of the lecturers, I assume would be the right word, of the drama department, helping us with the development of the show and ironing out some of the few kinks that we don't necessarily see through our own eyes, I think. It really brings the show together, and that's partly what's led to it being quite so polished as it was when we got to Edinburgh, I think.
Also, in turn, then, the drama department there as well. The university doesn't have a drama course, and yet they still have 2 full-time. You look confused.
Drama course?
Drama, I meant music.
I was going to say.
The university doesn't have a music course, yet they have 2 full-time members of staff there. Tom and David recorded our soundtrack album for us, available on CD Baby, iTunes and Spotify. But they were really helpful there, and that was totally free for us to do, and their support was really helpful, so thank you to them.
Well, they have a lot to be proud of with respect to the results, so it sounds like they got a lot back in terms of their investment of support.
No, we like to think so. We hope they're pleased with it. I mean, we're definitely, I think, now very, very proud of the show. I'm very, very proud of the cast and everything that we've come out with as a company so far. So I think it's, to have, hopefully they like coming to see the piece, and hopefully they enjoy watching it and everything. That's kind of as much as we could ask for, I think, really, if they like it.
So if a listener were interested in finding out more about the show, or perhaps purchasing the soundtrack, where would they go?
Well, I spent many hours toiling away making a lovely website. So if they go to argoseearts.co.uk, everything about the show, everything about the company is all available on there. And if they go /soundtrack, it will take them to all the places that they can buy it. But we've worked hard to make a website that makes the show really transparent, really easy to find out about us and what we do. And there's lots of lovely photos on there and all sorts of other information. So it's a great place to go.
Yeah. We also have a YouTube channel where you can listen to some of the demos and things that we've released. And Kate, our violinist, has been keeping a vlog of like our time in Edinburgh. So if you want a bit of insight into what our houses are actually like outside of the show, then that's a kind of good way of
her channel is Kate Ventures, all one word, so KATEVENTURES.
If there's one thing that I think we probably all encourage people to go away and watch, we spent a whole day in a derelict house very near Exeter filming the trailer for the show. It's only 2 minutes long, but it took probably days filming, 2 weeks of editing, and a good week working out what we were going to do for it as well. And that's all online. It's on our YouTube channel. It's got some fantastic music to it, and we're really glad how that came together. It gives a great insight to the show.
And I assume that the YouTube channel and Twitter, etc., is all linked from your primary website, so people can land on your hard work and explore outwards. Great. Well, Beth, Jack, and Tom, thanks so much for taking the time to discuss the show. I personally loved it, and I was really grateful to have the opportunity to chat with you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea, that a maiden there lived, that you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden she lived with no other thought but to love and be loved by me. with a love that the angels of heaven above coveted her and me.
Sing all the songs that before you I had longed to understand. I give you my hand, I give you my heart, and I start to see more clearly. There's a reason we have a voice to be heard. Oh, we are eternal, and we are angels, mark our love immortal. Stay with me, Annabelle.
The angels not half so happy above went envying her and me.
Forever I'll stay.
Yes, that was the reason they coldly came and bore her away from me. And so they aimed from above a bolt at my love and killed my Annabelle Lee. Now the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabelle Lee. And the stars never rise, but I see the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabelle Lee. And now all the night I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in your kingdom by the sea, in my kingdom by the sea, in our kingdom by the sea.
Sing all the songs that before you I had longed to understand, and now stay with me, Annabelle,
Annabelle
Musical talk. Well, there we are. We just heard another song from the House of Edgar, and that song was called Annabelle Lee. And my thanks go to Michael Gordon Shapiro for conducting that superb interview with Thomas, Beth and Jack. And I'd also like to thank Jack particularly because he's been so helpful for the creation of this episode by email. And my further thanks go to them all for allowing us to play so many songs from that very good score. To find out more, go to the website for the theatre group, www.argossyarts.co.uk. I do hope you've enjoyed hearing about the House of Edgar, and perhaps learning a bit about Edgar Allan Poe. I think it must be time for me to go, because there's a raven in the corner looking at me with its beady eye.
Nevermore!
Oh, go away!
Nevermore!
Get out of it! And indeed, it's time for us all to go away. So I think I will say goodbye to you by saying the magic word, goodbye. And we'll finish today, rather appropriately, with one more song from the House of Edgar about the raven.
Distinctly I remember a dark and cold December, when each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. With haste I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books relief of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore. For the rare and radiant maiden, who the angels named Lenore, it was then I heard a gentle rapping at my chamber door. Deep into the darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word Lenore. In there stepped a stately raven, summoned by the name Lenore, and it perched upon my chamber door and whispered,
Nevermore.
The raven sitting lonely at my lintel did speak only that one word, as if her soul in that one word she did outpour. Nothing further than she uttered, not a feather than she fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow you will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. You will leave me as she left me.
Nevermore.
Then I felt the air grow denser, like the aura of a spectre, and I heard the spirit's footfalls tinkle on the tufted floor. Wretch, thy God have lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee. Give me respite, give me mercy from my memories of Lenore. Spare me this mercy, so I forget my lost Lenore. Oh, spare me this mercy. Leave no black bloom as a token for that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quoth the raven.
Nevermore.
And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting, and the lamplight, oh, her streaming, throws her shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor, and my soul from out that shadow shall be lifted nevermore.
This episode of Musical Talk, edited and presented by Michael Gordon Shapiro and produced by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2016, except for the songs where the copyright remains with the original creators. And my thanks go to them for allowing us to play 4 songs in this programme. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our brand new website, musicaltalkpodcast.weebly.com, or subscribe to us on iTunes, and follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at Musical Talk Thos.
Nevermore.